You're listening to the Play Therapy Parenting Podcast with Dr. Brenna Hicks.
Hi, I'm Dr. Brenna Hicks, the Kid Counselor. This is the Play Therapy Parenting Podcast where I give you insight, awareness, and enlightenment about your parenting and your relationship with your kids. In today's episode, we are talking through not letting disapproval be a lingering voice in your child's life. I read a quote in a book that I was reading this week, and if y'all have been with me for any length of time, you know how much I love to read, and then you also know how much I love quotes, so this was kind of the perfect thing this week for me. And so essentially, I'm reading this book, and this quote just jumps off the page to me, and it just reinforces what I believe about children, what I believe about our role as adults in children's lives, why play therapy is structured the way that it is. So you're going to get a lot of good stuff out of this one quote from this great book that I was reading. And the quote is, although she hadn't seen her parents for years, it turned out that a parent's disapproval was a powerful, lingering voice that shaped and defined one's self-image. So let me read that again. It turned out that a parent's disapproval was a powerful, lingering voice that shaped and defined one's self-image. So obviously, I'm not going to get into the plot of the book and the main character that this was talking about and everything that happened. But that quote jumped off the page at me for a couple reasons, and so I'd like us to chat through those today. So the first is the disapproval and what that does when a child experiences that. So every child's going to understand what disapproval is. Every child's going to experience it at some point. So it's not to prevent disapproval from entering into a child's world, but it's to prevent it from being felt from a parent or a caregiver. Because parental disapproval is a totally different game versus the disapproval of a friend or the disapproval of a coach or the disapproval of someone else. Parents serve a unique role, and a parent's disapproval is a totally different thing. So we're going to talk through that. Secondly, we will talk through the unconditional love and acceptance. We've actually hit on that in several other episodes. I bring that to light quite frequently because I think we have to constantly keep that in our awareness. So we'll talk through the unconditional love and acceptance. And then finally, we'll talk about the power that we have as parents, as caregivers, as adults in a child's life. We have more power than we often realize. And with power comes responsibility. So we have to understand what that means and what that looks like, practically speaking, to be used appropriately and well. So the path to calm, confident, and in control parenting starts now. All right, so as we're thinking through disapproval, the interesting thing about disapproval is that we all want to avoid it. And some more so than others, obviously, right? So the people pleasers in the world, all of you that are raising your hands right now, I'm a reformed people pleaser, so my hand goes halfway up because I used to be far more of a people pleaser than I am now. But I had to work really hard to get there, so I get it. And so sometimes people pleasers are definitely all they want is to not have disapproval, right? They want to avoid disapproval at all costs because they want everyone to be happy with them. But then you still have even people who aren't particularly people pleasers, even people who aren't particularly perfectionistic or driven by what other people think. There's this deep sense that we're wired with to want to avoid people disapproving of us, especially people that we are the closest with, people who have the biggest influence in our lives, and the people that we need their approval the most, which you file that down, that lands squarely on parents in a child's life. So I like to use this stat quite often with my parents and even my teenagers sometimes at the center. We have to experience 7 positive things to combat 1 negative thing. That's what studies show about the way that we're wired, about the way that our brains work. So if you think about that, we can have a really negative experience with someone, something, some circumstance, some situation, 1 negative experience. And it, on average, takes 7 positive experiences to overwrite that negative memory that we've gone through. So when we think there's a 7-to-1 ratio here, we can imagine how deeply disapproval cuts. Because if we experience one moment of deep and honest disapproval from someone that matters, it takes 7 times on average. And typically they say 7 plus or minus 2. So arguably the range is 5 to 9. So then you're looking at 5 to 9 experiences where someone approves before it can counterbalance the one where someone disapproved. So that is meaningful, that's significant, and that's weighty. Because when we have kids who are wired, all kids need and want approval, even when they shouldn't. And what I mean by that is, even when a parent is not parenting effectively, is absent, is neglectful, is abusive, is any other fill in the blank, not treating children the way that they should, kids still need and want their approval. Children who are abused by parents still need and want that parent's approval. Children who are neglected by their parents still need and want approval. And so even when they shouldn't, even when it shouldn't matter because they don't deserve to have that much responsibility because they've proven that they can't, kids still are wired that way. And this is why adults in their 30s, 40s, 50s will still break down and cry talking about, I just always wanted my parents to be proud of me. I always wanted my dad to say that he loved me. I always wanted my mom to approve of the things that I did. So when we're talking through disapproval and understanding you can have one negative and you have to have upwards of 9 positives, and we're wired to want approval, disapproving of our children is way bigger than we think in the moment. And this is not said to be critical. It's not said to make you feel guilty or ashamed or any of those things. It's said for awareness and for enlightenment. That's what the goal is always in the Play Therapy Parenting Podcast, is to equip you with information, knowledge, and awareness so that you can make decisions that you feel are best for your children and for your families. And so the disapproval is big. And we don't want disapproval to be a lingering voice, because let's circle back to this quote. It turns out that a parent's disapproval was a powerful, lingering voice that shaped and defined one's self-image. And I don't necessarily want to get into self-image because that's a whole other podcast episode. Maybe at some point in the future, we'll talk through that. That would actually be a good one. Because self-image, self-esteem, self-confidence, self-worth, self-identity, there's so many selves, right? And we have to have an understanding of how that influences our daily interactions, our relationships, our worldviews, all of those things. So note to self, we'll probably need to do a self episode soon. But when we have this sense of disapproval lasts way longer than the moment, way longer than childhood, it's important for us to understand that we need to make sure, as people who love children in our lives, that we don't communicate disapproval to them. So let's talk about the next point, which is the antidote to disapproval, which is unconditional love and acceptance. Now, we talk about this a lot. And actually, one of the most recent episodes was the Bronfenbrenner quote. Remember that? I know, I can hear you all shouting it out to me. So someone has to have an irrational relationship with a child. So when we talked through that, if you did not listen to that episode, please go back and listen to it. It's just full of golden nuggets of wisdom. So make sure you go back and listen to the crazy irrational relationship with a child, Bronfenbrenner's quote. So when we're thinking in terms of that, unconditional love and acceptance is what that means. So it's rarely given, unfortunately. Kids are not really ever unconditionally loved and accepted. There's always a condition on those things. So if you obey I praise you. If you do what I want, I am affectionate to you. If you get good grades, you get rewarded. There's always conditional love and acceptance. Almost always. I don't want to use an absolute unless I mean it. So there's almost always conditional love and acceptance in a child's life. It takes someone realizing the power of unconditional love and acceptance. In my world, it's usually in the play therapy room. So play therapists provide unconditional love and acceptance, but parents are capable of it too. And so then I always get a lot of question and a lot of flack, and not flack, but I get hesitancy, that's a better word, from parents that say, so no matter what my kid does, I just have to love and accept them. No, what that means is behavior sometimes needs limits, but who the child is always unconditionally loved and accepted, even when they're at their worst, even when they're misbehaving, even when they're disobedient, even when they're snarky and snotty and angry and throwing things and doing whatever they're doing. We set limits on behavior, but we unconditionally love and accept them for who they are, for their feelings, for their actions, for whatever it is that they're dealing with in that moment. I unconditionally love and accept you, even though sometimes I cannot accept your behavior. And this is powerful because when we're aware of unconditional love and acceptance, it changes the game. And a child gets it too. Children realize this is different. No matter how I feel, no matter what I say, no matter what happens, no matter how much I lose it, someone is always on my team. Someone is always in my court. Someone is always going to bat for me, always saying, I accept you and love you no matter what, even at your worst. And it's amazing, really. I actually started a new podcast. So those of my play therapy parenting podcast people, I'm deep diving into the child-centered play therapy approach in a new podcast called Play Therapy Podcast. So just without the parenting, Play Therapy Podcast. If you would like to check that out, if you are someone who wants more seminal, detailed information about the play therapy model, check that out. But I'm bringing that up to tell you that because I'm doing this podcast now and I'm really going deep into theory and deep into the way that it works and the philosophies and the foundations and the principles and all of these things, I found this amazing premise in one of the books that I was reading, and I shared it in that podcast, but I'll share it here because it's relevant. They talk about the play therapist looks at the child and knows that they are, quote, about to be, end quote. And what that means is it creates an environment and a relationship with unconditional love, unconditional acceptance, no matter where the child is, no matter how dysregulated, no matter how upset, how angry, how violent, how whatever, you fill in the negative adjective there, no matter what they are doing or feeling. The play therapist gives them the space and the freedom and the relationship that communicates, I believe that you are about to be regulated. You are about to be kind. You are about to be obedient. You are about to be engaged. You are about to be happy. Fill in the blank. It's the, I have faith in you. I believe in you. I accept you for where you are, but I know there are better things to come because you're capable of those better things. And so when we're thinking about unconditional love and acceptance, I genuinely believe those two things are fused together. Because when we have unconditional love and acceptance, we are also implying, I know that you are about to be the best version of yourself that you can. So you might be dysregulated right now. You might be angry. You might be aggressive. You might be disobedient. You might be whatever right now. And that's okay. I love and accept you anyway. But I know that you are about to be something better because you're capable of it and because you want to be. And we talk about this a lot. Kids don't like being stuck. They would never choose to be stuck in a dysregulated state. So when I have parents tell me, oh, they do it for attention. They do it because they're manipulative. They do it because it gets a rise out of me. They do it because they know that it pokes a button. None of those things are true. I can see why people feel that way. I can understand why parents think that those things are true, but they're not, ever. What is actually going on is the child is stuck in a dysregulated state and they don't know how to get out of it. So when we understand that, it's far easier to unconditionally love and accept kids and believe that they are about to be something better. So that's the unconditional love piece. And then finally, the power that we have. I think we cannot neglect to address the power that we have as adults in the lives of children that love them and care for them and want what's best for them. We have this incredible power, this incredible platform to create a relationship and communicate to a child what we want them to believe about themselves. I use the quote from Pretty Woman quite frequently as well. You can tell I love quotes. My quote book is very full. Four rounds in. I've filled 3. I'm on the 4th. And quotes are important because they show us life lessons, right? In one sentence or 2. I love them. So the Pretty Woman quote is, when you're told that you don't matter long enough, you start to believe it. And that's when we talked about the Pygmalion effect and self-fulfilling prophecy. So if you've missed those episodes, go back. Those are really rich too. But when we think about the about to be unconditional love premise, we have the opportunity to pour into a child statements that they will become those things. You are capable. You can do that. You are able. You can work hard. You can figure it out. There's all of these things that we say to kids, and they become what we communicate to them. So if we communicate, you are obedient, you are kind, you are helpful, you are loving, you are friendly, you are whatever these positive traits are, they rise to the occasion and they become those things. Conversely is also true. If we say, you always argue, you always disobey, you always do this, you're never this, all of a sudden, they become what we say to them because it becomes true. And one of my other quotes that I love is, quote, "One unthought out word has the power to change a child forever," end quote. That's straight out of my quote book. I have no idea where that came from nor who said it, but that's in my quote book. One unthought out word has the power to change a child forever. When someone in a child's life says, "You're an idiot," that one word that was unthought out and unkind and unloving and unaccepting and all of those other uns, that has the power to change a child forever. But so does you have a brain that can do anything. What would you choose for your child to believe? What would you choose for your child to strive to become? An idiot or a child with a brain that can do anything? It's powerful. The power that we have with the things that we say and the way that we treat our children. Now, let me throw a little side road here, because a lot of us, especially being a part of this family, this play therapy parenting family, listening to these podcast episodes, I don't think that this is full of parents that would say you're an idiot, right? But what I do think is sometimes our nonverbals say far more than our verbals. So when we look at our children and what we're thinking is, "You're such an idiot," and we don't say it, that is felt too. And children internalize the nonverbal messages too. And so we have to be very careful, because our body language, our tone of voice, our facial expressions, our nonverbals communicate more than what we say sometimes. So when we're interacting with our kids, we have the power to uplift them. We have the power to encourage them, to support, to accept, to love. So we need to use that power wisely. We need to use that power responsibly. And we need to be intentional about the way that we express daily interactions with our children. Because if the message is consistently, and we're never perfect, right? Only Jesus was, so we can't expect to be perfect. So this isn't a, "I can't ever mess this up," but this is a, "I'm going to try really hard to make sure that as often as I can, I say to my children, verbally and non-verbally, I unconditionally love and accept you." and there is never a hint of disapproval, because I accept you no matter where you are, who you are, how you are. I believe that you are about to be something better, and I don't want disapproval to be a lingering voice in your life. So all of that from a quote in a book. It's the way I roll. So I hope that you are encouraged this week. I hope that you're able to walk away from listening to this and say, there are moments all throughout every day where I can unconditionally love and accept my child, and I can guard against disapproval seeping in to our relationship. And it's just about being intentional. It's about changing our frame of reference, changing our perspective on behavior, because behavior is frustrating. There's no doubt about it. And when children are disobedient and angry and difficult, it is not easy to unconditionally love and accept them, but it's a choice that we make. There's so many phrases, love is a verb, right? And we have to sometimes choose to love someone. It's not a noun, it's a verb. So sometimes that's a difficult choice. But in the same vein, we can choose to unconditionally love and accept our children even when it's difficult, because the alternative is disapproving of them, and the effects of that are far greater. So I hope that's encouraging to you. Please email me if you want to share your stories, ask me questions, reach out to me in any way, brenna@thekidcounselor.com. And if you have not already, go to playtherapyparenting.com/newsletter. That is where you can subscribe, and then you can stay up to date with everything that we're doing around the play therapy parenting world. And also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast if you haven't already. Then you will always be notified when a new episode drops, and it helps us to show up more to other people who are searching for parenting podcasts. So to get this out to more people, the more people subscribe, the easier it is for them to find us. So I would greatly appreciate that. In a future episode, I'm going to talk through an article that I read in actually it used to be the St. Pete Times. So we now have the Tampa Bay Times locally. Ages ago, it was the St. Pete Times, and I found an article from 1993, and it was just amazing about interacting with teens and adolescents from a parenting perspective, and there's a lot of overlap with the play therapy model, so I want to share that with you next time. We'll talk through Say Less, Listen More regarding teens. But as always, thank you for being a part of the Play Therapy Parenting Podcast family. We'll talk again soon. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Play Therapy Parenting Podcast with Dr. Brenna Hicks. For more episodes and to subscribe to our newsletter, please go to www.playtherapyparenting.com.